So we're talking about photosynthesis today, and we're going to look at the biochemical reactions. So this is an overview of the biochemical reactions, and there are two major parts to it. There are the light-dependent reactions, and then there's the Calvin cycle or the Calvin-Benson cycle. These are the light-independent reactions. What's that mean, David?
It means that they do not require light to happen.
Very good. Light-independent reactions. And so
I think, yep.
okay, so the whole overview for photosynthesis, you have the equation, let's see. You start with carbon dioxide and water, and you need light, and you end up making glucose and oxygen. And so the light-dependent reactions are your transformation from light to chemical energy. And so that takes this, light, and it takes water. And so you take water and you split it. And so if you look at water, it's got two hydrogens and an oxygen. And if you break off that hydrogen to give you hydrogen ion, and you do the same with this one, you'll have an extra electron or two, and then you'll have oxygen. And so the water will be split up, and you'll have oxygen, and then you'll have electrons that can be moved around in here, and hydrogen ions. These membranes are called thylakoids, and so you use this electron and the light, and you use the light to bump up the electron to a higher energy level. And when that electron loses energy, you make ATP. And so that's this. So you start with light and water, and you make oxygen, and then you make these middlemen, ATP and NADPH. ATP has energy, and NADPH carries electrons. Those are the light reactions. And let's switch colors. Oops. And so the next part is that you use the energy from these two, and you use carbon dioxide. So here's the light-independent reactions. The carbon dioxide and the energy with the electrons that you stored from before are used to fix carbon, it's called. You put the carbon and you shove them together to make this big carbon compound that has how many carbons? 1, 2, 3, 4.
6.
Good. 5, 6 altogether. And of course they have oxygen and hydrogen on them, like that. And I'm too lazy to draw every single one of them, but you'd have lots of hydrogens and oxygens on them, etc., etc. So that's your glucose. What do you think? Yay. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about the light reactions first, and then we'll go and talk about the dark reactions next, or the light-independent reactions. So the first thing we have to talk about is this carrier called NADPH. And so this is just another molecule that you need to know. And it can either be in the form of NADPH or NADP+. If it's NADPH, it's got an extra couple of electrons and a hydrogen on it. And so think of him as a delivery boy. Isn't he cute?
Yeah.
So NADPH is a delivery boy. And he can either be in the form of NAD+ or NADPH. And if he's NADPH, he's carrying these electrons and the hydrogen ion. And if he's NADP+, then he is not carrying that stuff. So NADP+ picks up two high-energy electrons and hydrogen from the light reactions to form NADPH. NADPH carries, you can call it energy, to be passed on to the carbon dioxide to make glucose. So the energy is in the form of electrons that have been bumped up to a higher energy level. And all of this stuff happens in the chloroplast. So it occurs across these membranes, which are called
lipid bilayers.
Well,
oh, sorry. Thylakoids.
Thylakoid membranes.
Wasn't sure what you wanted me to say.
They are made out of lipid bilayers, but with chlorophyll in them. And they use what kind of energy?
Light energy.
Light energy. Good. And so here's what look at the lipid bilayers. Isn't that cool? Mm-hmm. This is in one thylakoid membrane here. So here's the thylakoid membrane. And this thing, when you have a protein to another protein to another protein to another protein to another protein, and they're passing electrons to each other, do you know what you call that?
No.
It's called an electron transport chain.
Oh, right.
It's like a whole, let's say you're trying to put out a fire and you don't...
Can it only be called an electron transport chain?
I don't know, what else would you call it? You could call it the light reactions.
Okay.
But if you have ever seen an old movie where they're trying to put out a fire, someone has a bucket of water and they hand it to the next guy, who hands it to the next guy, who hands it to the next guy. And that's really what's happening here. You've got an electron moved from here to here to here to here to here. And every time it goes through, it loses energy. And when it loses energy, you move these hydrogen ions from this side into this side. So where do you get those electrons?
From the from the water.
From the water. Good. And so the water's broken apart. You pull the oxygens off, and that's your waste product. And you pull some hydrogens apart, which stay here. And then you take the electrons off the hydrogens, and the hydrogens go in here. Is water a very energetic thing?
No.
No. So its electrons aren't very energetic. So what gives the electrons their energy?
The sun.
Beautiful, the sunlight. And so these electrons are bumped up to a higher energy level in photosystem 2. Why would you start with photosystem 2?
Because it was discovered first.
Yeah, isn't that ridiculous? So the electrons are moved up to a higher energy level, and then they're moved from one to another to another to another. And when they're moved along, they lose energy, and the hydrogens are moved in here. So inside these membranes, you get tons of hydrogen ions. So if you think of these green things as hydrogen ions, you're putting a ton of them in here. And so when you have a ton of them in here, I want you to think about that as potential energy. They wouldn't naturally be in there, they would naturally move out. And so all of these hydrogen ions in here with not very many out here gives you a bunch of potential energy. And so that extra potential energy is used when the electrons come out because they kind of want to, not that they want to, but things naturally go from high to low energy. When they go out, they change the shape of this enzyme called ATP synthase, and that's the energy needed to make ATP. Once you have ATP made, what you've done is turned light energy into chemical energy. Whoa.
Mm.
And so the electron has to keep moving through, and the way it does that is some more light comes into photosystem 1, bounces it up to a higher energy level, and it's a high enough energy level for NADP+, our carrier, to pick it up and make NADPH. This is going to be important because carbon dioxide needs hydrogens and electrons to make glucose. You can't just shove a bunch of these carbon dioxides together to make glucose, because if you notice, glucose has some hydrogen ions and electrons in it. And so that's really the light reactions. So the whole point of the light reactions is to take light energy, transfer it into chemical energy, which is what happened right here. And then the electrons from the water were energized to make NADP+. So the light reactions start with light and water and make NADP+ and ATP. So we're going to look at that, the details of that a little bit more. So it produces oxygen from water, and you can see that right here. Water's broken apart to release oxygen. It converts ATP to ADP,
No,
which is happening here.
You said that wrong. It converts ADP to ATP.
Sorry, it converts ADP, adenosine diphosphate, to 3 of them. You put a P on an ADP to make ATP. It also converts NADP+ into NADPH, which is going to carry electrons. And so here's the overview. You start with water, you break it apart, you release oxygen. You also have some hydrogens that get stuck in here, and electrons that are moved through. The energized electrons from light are moved through to shove more hydrogen ions in here. When the hydrogen ions move out, you make ATP. The electrons are captured at the end by this guy. And now we're ready to go into the light-independent reactions. Oh, one more picture. So this is still light-dependent reactions. The sunlight causes an electron from water to be pumped up, and so this is showing you how much energy there is. The energy is released as it moves through the electron transport chain. That's used to pump hydrogen ions through, which make ATP. Light, again, in photosystem 1, pumps the electrons up to a higher energy level, and then finally you make NADPH at the end.
So something similar happened with the things of the volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, good question. Is there an electron transport chain with those? You know what? I have to look that up, Davey. I'm not sure. Probably, yeah. I can tell you, yeah. I think I'm going to leave it at that, probably. So water is split in photosystem 2, and ATP is made, while the energy carrier NADPH is made in photosystem 1. You need this, it almost seems like you're done when you make ATP, but you still need to make NADPH. And if you just,
More ATP.
yeah, well, yeah, to get more, well, no, to fix carbon in the light independent reactions.
Exactly.
And so that's why you need photosystem 1, because you want to make NADPH. Otherwise, see how the energy is kind of lower here? NADPH needs the energy to be a little bit higher to steal the electrons. So photosystem 2 absorbs light energy. That's right here. And this is just putting it all in order. Electrons are energized and passed on to the electron transport chain. That's here. Lost electrons are replaced from the splitting of water into 2 hydrogens and free electrons and oxygen. Then right here, you have hydrogens, hydrogen ions pumped across the thylakoid membrane. So you're shoving tons and tons and tons of hydrogens in here. And then you have photosystem 1, which happens second, which is kind of weird. The high energy electrons are moved through photosystem 1 through the electron transport chain again. Bum, ba, dum, bum. So this whole thing is the electron transport chain. You've got photosystem 2, photosystem 1. Energy is used to transport the electrons from the stroma to the inner thylakoid membrane. So here's the stroma. So again, here's the chloroplast. It's a double membrane. And then you've got these thylakoids. You're shoving hydrogens inside here. And then in a little bit, they're going to come out through ATP synthase. NADP plus, right here, is converted into NADPH when it picks up 2 electrons and some hydrogen ions. That's this part. Hydrogen ions build up right here in the thylakoid membrane, setting up a gradient. So it's an electrical and a chemical gradient. So electrical because they're charged and chemical because they're chemicals. What the heck's a gradient? Do you know?
Oh, a gradient is like a difference across a membrane.
Good. So if you have a ton of hydrogens here and not so many here, that's a gradient. If you've ever seen a banking on a road, you know how it's, well, that's a little exaggerated, but if you have your car driving on an exit ramp, that's a pretty bad one. Anyway, the road is graded, maybe not quite that extreme, but anyway, that's kind of a high to low thing to think about. So that's the same thing as a gradient here. High concentration here, low here. Things naturally go from high to low, and so that's potential energy getting released here as kinetic energy makes this thing move, which makes ATP. So that's potential energy when you have stuff in here. And plants use that energy that ATP, to fix carbon or to shove carbon together to make glucose. And photophosphorylation, photo means light. When you phosphorylize something, it means you stick a phosphate on. So if you have ADP, that's adenosine with 2 P's, phosphorylation means you stick another phosphate on there. Oh, look, I just made ATP, as in try. So ATP synthase is this enzyme right here. It changes shape when the hydrogen comes through, and it puts the ADP and the P together. So ATP synthase in the thylakoid membrane, that's this, allows the hydrogens to move out of the thylakoid down its concentration gradient. And that same enzyme uses this energy to make ATP. So you have all those hydrogens in here. When they come out from high to low concentration, they release their potential energy that moves this enzyme just enough to shove these 2 things together to make ATP. And that's photophosphorylation. And so this is just another picture of it, ATP synthase, hydrogens moving through, and you make ATP. You can see the electron transport chain pumped in a bunch of hydrogens. And the light reaction summary is that you started with water and light. And the products, the energy products, are ATP and NADPH. And then the byproduct is oxygen. That's just an extra product that happened to be made. And that's it for the light reactions.